I would like to welcome you to the 2013 Dubin Lecture. My name is Charles Manikin, and I'm the director of the Joseph and Rebecca Meyerhoff Center of Jewish Studies, which houses the Joseph and Alma Gildenhorn Institute of Israel Studies. I'm pinch hitting today for Professor Yoram Perry, the director of the Institute, and the Jack Kay Professor of Israel Studies. Yoram is on research leave in Israel, working among other things on the Institute's Israel 2023 project, and he's very sorry that he is unable to attend. He told me to convey to you his warmest regards and greetings from Tel Aviv. I'd like to recognize and thank Dick and Liz Dubin for their friendship and support. This is our 5th Dubin Lecture, and the Dubin Lecture is the annual high point of Israel Studies lecture and colloquium series. It's veritably the jewel in our crown. I would also like to recognize and thank the Friends of Israel Studies at Maryland, foremost among them, our stalwart supporters, Ambassador Joe and Alma Gildenhorn. How lovely that we can have this event in the theater that bears their names. And finally, I would like to recognize and thank President Wallace Lowe, not only for his support of the Gildenhorn Institute, but for his bold initiatives in forging partnerships between the University of Maryland and universities in Israel and in Jordan. President Lowe. The Gildenhorn Institute for Israel Studies is dedicated to advancing knowledge and understanding of the State of Israel through exemplary teaching and scholarship. As director of the Meyerhoff Center for Jewish Studies, I have watched the Gildenhorn Institute grow and flourish, and I'm pleased to say that the two programs work seamlessly together in intellectual and administrative partnership. Before I invite Dean Thornton Hill to introduce our distinguished speaker, I would like to take this opportunity to announce 2 new additions to the Institute: the Gildenhorn Family Scholarship and the Tel Aviv University Partnership. The Gildenhorn Family Scholarship, a merit-based endowed scholarship for a student minoring in Israel Studies, was created in honor of Alma and Joe Gildenhorn by their son Michael Gildenhorn and his wife Kathy, and their daughter Carol Weiner and her husband Michael. And Michael Weiner is here tonight. Please join me in thanking him. The scholarship will be awarded for the first time this fall, and I encourage all interested students to apply. This past spring, the university created a partnership with Tel Aviv University, which will take on many forms across many disciplines. One of the first iterations will be an Israel Studies course this spring that will utilize video conferencing technology. The instructor will be in Tel Aviv, and the students will be in classrooms in both College Park and Tel Aviv. This is the first of what we expect will be an ongoing series of global classrooms. And more information about that is available outside the hall as you leave. And now, without further ado, I'm pleased and honored to introduce Bonnie Thornton Dill, Dean of the College of Arts and Humanities, who will introduce our speaker. Bonnie Thornton Dill assumed the position of Dean in the College of Arts and Humanities on August 1st, 2011. Prior to becoming Dean, she served the Women's Studies Department as chair for 8 years, where she retains the professorship that she began more than 2 decades ago. Internationally known for her cross-cutting scholarship on race and gender, Black and Latino women in higher education, as well as issues such as work, family, and poverty, Professor Thornton Dill led women's studies at Maryland to national prominence. It is one of the first universities in the United States to offer a doctoral degree in the field. University of Maryland serves as the base of the National Women's Studies Association and editorial home of the pioneering journal, Feminist Studies. Her scholarship includes 3 books and numerous articles. She earned her doctoral and master's degrees in sociology and human relations, respectively, from New York University, and her bachelor's degree in English from the University of Rochester. On a personal note, I would like to add that the Dean has been a true friend of both Israel Studies and Jewish Studies, offering support, guidance, and encouragement. I am grateful for this opportunity to thank the Dean publicly for all she has done for the Meyerhoff Center and the Gildenhorn Institute. Dean Thornton Hill.
Good evening, and thank you, and again, welcome. Every day we see new and often compelling headlines calling our attention to the changes in the Middle East. In fact, the title of our program this afternoon, Seismic Shifts in the Middle East, expresses the breadth and profound effect these changes are having across the globe. Tectonic plates are shifting. Thus, this is a particularly opportune moment to hear from Congresswoman Jane Harman, who has graciously agreed to share her insights and perspectives and help us make sense of the shifts and intransigencies taking place in what has become an epic geopolitical narrative. Fostering campus-wide dialogues on captivating and timely topics is one of the key roles of the College of Arts and Humanities, and as Dean, I look forward to participating in such high-quality events, and I always look forward to the Dubin Lecture. This series has done an outstanding job of helping to extend learning beyond the classroom, engaging students, regardless of college or major, in discussions around some of the most challenging issues of our time. The series speaks directly to the college's mission to create global citizens because this series emphasizes the need to come together across disciplines, age groups, backgrounds, to hear and learn from others that represent a range of different points of view. The Dubin Lecture Series has hosted a wide range of prominent speakers to help us think creatively about seemingly intractable issues in the Middle East. Past speakers have included Washington Post columnist David Ignatius, Israeli Ambassador Michael Oren, and last year's guest, Chris Wallace, host of Fox News Sunday. This evening, it's my great honor to introduce the 2013 speaker, the Honorable Jane Harman. Representing California's 36th district for 9 terms, Congresswoman Harman served on all major security-related committees, most notably Armed Services, Intelligence, and Homeland Security. She is recognized as a national expert about matters at the nexus of security and public policy. 2 years ago, she resigned from Congress and began her term as the director, president, and CEO of the Wilson International Center for Scholars. She is also a member of the Defense Policy Board, the CIA External Advisory Board, the State Department Foreign Policy Board, and the Director of National Intelligence Senior Advisory Group. Congresswoman Harman is also a trustee of the Aspen Institute and the University of Southern California. This evening, she will discuss the current state of affairs in Israel and the Middle East. Given the political unrest in Egypt, ongoing civil war in Syria, new leadership positions in Iran, and a fresh round of peace negotiations between the Israelis and Palestinians, there's a lot to talk about, and so we need to get to her right away. I'm confident her remarks will be informative, and please join me in welcoming Jane Harman to the stage.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. It's an incredible honor to be here. I was looking forward to this, Joe and Alma and Dickie, and sorry Liz isn't here. But I really have been looking forward to this for a long time. Hearing that my friends and your friends, David Ignatius, Michael Oren, and Chris Wallace, preceded me is truly terrifying. But on behalf of the female population, I will do my best. No couple has been closer to me since Sydney's death than Joe and Alma. I've told that to them personally. I want to thank them again for being magnificent friends and magnificent supporters both of the University of Maryland and the Wilson Center. And about 2 weeks, Joe stepped down as chairman of the Wilson Board, where he served with great distinction for 11 years. In political years, that is just beyond ever. And we were thrilled to name one of our meeting rooms for Joe and Alma. Only 2 other meeting rooms are named for past supporters of the center. One is for Senator Moynihan, who thought up the idea of a living memorial to Woodrow Wilson, and the other is for Joe Flom, who was a pioneer attorney, but also an early chairman of the Wilson Center. So it's a big deal to us, and I just wanted you to know that this is not the only Gildenhorn room on the planet. But this is a special place, and in 2006, Sydney and I were proud to be here. when the center was dedicated. And we're also very proud, and I still am proud, to be close friends of the Dubins, and I think this lecture is a big deal. So please send my love to Liz. I'm sorry she's not here. And I would point out that the Dubins, who also helped the Wilson Center, are the best definition of bipartisanship. He's a Democrat, she's a Republican, they cohabit, and I only wish the members of the House and Senate Budget Committees could learn something from the Dubins. This afternoon, I do want to talk about seismic shifts in the Middle East. I come from California, where we're used to seismic shifts, but the big one will be soon. Let me tell you two things. First, how I think about Israel, and then second, what I think about Israel. And my goal is to get through this quickly so we can do questions and answers, because I think that would be more interesting to all of you. So how do I think about Israel? Well, I am the daughter of a refugee from Nazi Germany. Some of you know this story. But my father was born in what was then Austria-Hungary, became Poland, and his parents and he moved to Cologne, Germany when he was very young. His father soon died of tuberculosis, and he grew up with his mother, an only child, with his widowed mother behind a little store that they owned, or that she owned in Cologne. And he managed to go to medical school in Cologne, and the year he graduated, which was 1934, was the last year Jews were permitted to graduate from medical school. He wore a yellow star, he had to sit in the hallway, they didn't let Jews in the classroom, and when he took his final exam, his oral exam, the examiner turned his back on him because he was a Jew. And a year later, he found sponsors in the United States, came through Ellis Island with no money, interned at the only Jewish hospital on Long Island, gave blood once a week to support himself, and some years later married my mother, the daughter of Russian immigrants, etc. And ultimately, I was born in New York, not so long after that, and my brother was, and we moved to California, and then my father became a very successful medical doctor in Los Angeles. And when first of all, that was a powerful dream that I heard growing up. But when I was elected to Congress, now 21 years ago, my father told me that growing up behind the store, he dreamed of escaping to France, but never imagined he would make it to the United States, become successful himself, have a son who became a successful medical doctor, and have a daughter who served in the United States Congress. And I have to tell you, you hear that, you only have to hear that once, and it is just unbelievably powerful. And my father died some years ago, but not before he saw me try to spread my wings in Congress. And I have never forgotten that, and I only regret that I didn't ask him more about his personal history. But while in Congress, I made 25 trips to Israel and the Middle East, and I've made many since. I take great pride in the fact that, among other recognitions, I was once honored by the Israeli embassy here for my role in supporting and protecting the Iron Dome program, something I got to know a lot about. Went to Paul Marquis Air Force Base many times, fought for U.S. financial support for the program, and Israel is now protected by the successor program to that one. I also treasure a comment that a prior ambassador, David Avery, who led the mission to take out the Iraq nuclear reactor in the 80s, made to me. David said, if you had been born in Israel, you would have been a general in the Air Force. You bet. Absolutely right. And I was enormously pained, politics is personal, we all know this, by a smear campaign in 2006 that somehow claimed that I offered to interfere with a Justice Department prosecution in exchange for getting AIPAC's help to become chairman of the Intelligence Committee. It was a smear, it was false, and I didn't need to make deals with AIPAC. It's an organization I've long supported and whose support I have long treasured. But finally, every time I go to Israel, I feel at home, as I'm sure many of you do. So that's how I think about Israel. What do I think about Israel? Well, I think Israel's security is an essential security interest of the United States. And through the years, Congress, on a overwhelming bipartisan basis, which may even include Ted Cruz, who I understand is about to go to Israel, and all U.S. presidents have shared this belief. But to me, as an American Jew, the identity of Israel as a democratic and Jewish state is also an essential driver of the U.S.-Israel relationship. I want to discuss some of the developments, and let me do it briefly, through that lens, starting with the peace process, and then let me make a few comments about Syria, Egypt, Iran, and other things. I happened to chat with Michael Oren yesterday. He is now back in Israel. And he mentioned that last week he met with a very high-level U.S. delegation, part of BEN's Business Executives for National Security, who were meeting with very, very high-level Israeli officials, and he was there. And he said all of the conversation was about Iran, not that it's an unimportant subject. None of it was about the peace process. His view was that this could be good or bad. It might be good because if less attention is paid to what's going on with the peace process, maybe some of the crucial preliminary work will proceed outside the headlines, and maybe that will be helpful. But actually, I think it's bad. Because I think if people in Israel aren't talking about the peace process, senior leaders of Israel aren't talking about the peace process, it may mean that there will be no deal because they don't want it as more than John Kerry and I do. My Wilson Center colleague and friend to many here, Aaron David Miller, warns, and I agree with this, that, quote, if the U.S. wants to reach an agreement more than the parties, overreach and errors may ensue. This is one of the lessons learned from the failed Camp David talks at the end of the Clinton administration. Rushing into end-state talks when no party is prepared is prepared risks the entire process. But in my view, the parties, especially Israel, should want peace. A deal is the best way to lock in protection for Israel by the entire neighborhood. It's also a way to reduce the rising tide of anti-Semitism, some of which is fueled by the view, not all of which, that Israel is an occupier. The Saudi proposal, which I'm sure you all know about, has been on the table since 2002. Despite Saudi Arabia's increasingly testy behavior toward the West, especially its surprising decision last week to reject election to the UN Security Council, the 2002 offer remains unchanged. I won't review it because I'm sure you all know about it. While any final deal is up to the parties themselves, neighborhood buy-in is essential. And that comes with the 2002 Saudi deal, which of course has to include land swaps and other things that you understand. And yes, many countries in the neighborhood are in turmoil, but, at least as I see it, collective recognition of a Jewish state with secure boundaries is strongly in Israel's interest, and it is strongly in the future state of Palestine's interest. Treading water, which is, I think, some of what's going on, doesn't work if there are tsunami-level waves. That's a recipe for drowning. So, turning to a few other issues. Syria. Whether we call the possession and use of chemical weapons a red line or not, it is a tragedy. And efforts to identify and deactivate Syria's stocks of chemical weapons and delivery capacity are critically important. Those efforts are succeeding. No kidding, they are succeeding. Syria, the Syrian government has identified, I don't know about all the stockpiles, it's very important for folks to make sure that all the stockpiles are identified, but actions are underway to deactivate the delivery mechanisms and to water down the stockpiles, which will make them ineffective. This is close to miraculous, but it's not adequate. There is talk, and I hope it happens, of what's called Geneva II, which is supposed to include all the relevant stakeholders, including the opposition, and to structure a transition government for Syria. I think this is critically important. It's important to get Bashar out of there, which some want, but also to structure a successor government that promises stability in Syria. The worst outcome would be to remove Bashar and then have radical Islamists take over governing Syria, which is a possibility. But if Geneva II succeeds, that's not the direction we'll take. The direction will be more like Yemen. And to remind, there was a really bad president of Yemen who stepped aside. His vice president took over. A new government was structured. The vice president was elected. It's not a perfect solution, but there is more stability in Yemen, and Yemen is cooperating with the United States and others in our counterterrorism efforts. So that's a pretty good outcome. Yemen good enough, as our military would call it, and what I'm looking for is Syria good enough. And I think that Syria good enough is strongly in Israel's interest, and would note, by the way, Israel's unsung efforts to care for Syrian refugees. This is going on now, on the border and in Jordan. A really wonderful thing. Turning to Egypt, Shibli Talami, who's right there, is headed to Egypt again. I've been there 4 times in the last 18 months. Egypt is a very tough problem. I think our goal needs to be to support the fledgling government in its transition to democracy. Not to support it because it's a military government, but to support it because it will help the transition to a pluralist democracy, which after all was the goal of the revolution that occurred almost 3 years ago. Israel and we need to worry about whether that transition will occur. But many in the government now, including Nabil Fahmy, who many of you know, the former Egyptian ambassador to the U.S., now Egypt's foreign minister, are very talented. In my view, my personal view, the suspension of military aid recently by the Obama White House is needlessly provocative and won't get us anything. I think we need to be carefully supportive, just as we are now being carefully supportive of the new government in Pakistan. Iran. Iran remains the central problem, but it's also an opportunity. At least to me, it's an opportunity. Observers whom you know and I know, like Stu Eisenstadt, are hopeful, although the earliest evidence from the phase 1 of the talks convey a warmer environment, but little progress. Some observers, whom you all know too, like Ann Applebaum, are less hopeful. She wrote a stinging op-ed the other day in the Post denouncing Rouhani's appointment of someone named Mustafa Pourmohammadi to his cabinet, a henchman and a possible war criminal, and condemning the fact that there were, she claimed, 30 political executions just as the talks were occurring just a week ago. To her, this means an ominous outcome, but to others, including the Wilson scholar Michael Adler, who was there and who quoted some of the senior U.S. negotiators, the changed environment could mean that there's a different and better outcome. Quoting one senior U.S. official, "I have never had such intense, detailed, straightforward, candid conversations with the Iranian delegation. We are beginning that kind of negotiation to get in a place where you might possibly have an agreement." There is simply no chance that the U.S. will sacrifice Israel's interest to cut a deal and avoid war with Iran. Again, to quote Aaron Miller, "At the end of the day, the U.S. and Israel have the same basic goal regarding Iran: to set back the clock and lengthen the time it would take Iran to weaponize its nuclear assets. A deal could leave the framework for an Iranian civil nuclear program in place. It could leave that in place, while putting in safeguards and constraints to prevent Iran from proliferating quickly and quietly. That deal, leaving the civil nuclear program in place, would serve Israeli and U.S. interests. It's hard to imagine, however, a deal that did any less than this would satisfy U.S. needs. Final issue, let me just put it out there, and that is the need for a better Middle East narrative by Israel and by the United States. As I mentioned, the rise of anti-Semitism is horrifying, and right-wing pro-Nazi groups in Hungary and Austria and others should be roundly condemned. In that connection, there was a fascinating article on the front page of the paper yesterday about the Berlin Festival Orchestra. Many of you probably saw it, whose conductor, Ivan Fischer, who is Jewish, bravely performed a new opera last week that he composed called The Red Heifer, which is using art to slam the far-right forces in Hungary. But it remains too easy, absent a peace deal, to characterize Israel as occupiers. And it remains too easy to characterize the U.S. as an invader of Muslim countries. A peace deal, I think, would help correct both misimpressions, and it would correct the view that the U.S. is not an honest broker. The U.S. has tried very hard, many of you in this room know this and agree, to help both sides achieve a peace deal. And we get credit sometimes from both sides. We also get denounced from both sides. I guess as a seasoned politician, that's probably a pretty good record if you're getting slammed by both sides. But wouldn't it be nice to have a peace deal decided by the countries, Israel and the Palestinian Authority, and one country and one prospective country, and then be cheered for our efforts in helping that to come about? I think that John Kerry, who is probably the most enthusiastic supporter of a peace deal, should be nominated for sainthood, which is an interesting concept since he's partly Jewish. But his enthusiasm and personal effort and the enormous talent that another friend, and I'm sure a friend of yours, Martin Indyk, brings at Kerry's side to move the process forward is hugely important. The peace process is not the center of all of it, but it would provide far better protection for Israel and a far better narrative for the United States. This institute and obviously this audience can help, and you may be doing that. But to sum up, Israel was a powerful dream for my father, and I inherited that powerful dream from him. And I'm going to do everything I can to help make Israel secure in my lifetime. It's something I really pledged to him, and it's something I have determined to do. And I'm just hopeful that my kids and my grandkids, who will visit Israel again with me on a big birthday, never mind, in a couple of years, will come to a place that has secure borders and that has a neighborhood that not only recognizes it, but trades with it and respects it. And that's my dream, and thank you very much for asking me to give you this. So, I have a feeling questions are coming, and we're going to sit down. Is that right? Okay.
So we have microphones on both sides, and you're more than welcome to ask Congresswoman Harman. Yes.
Okay, my name is Herbert Grossman. I'm a retired judge. Could you tell me how it would be in Israel's interest, as far as security goes, to withdraw from the mountain ridges in the West Bank, as almost every proposal requires Israel to do, and what the Obama administration and Kerry are promoting? Let me just finish this. Every withdrawal by Israel has resulted in hostilities from Area A in the West Bank, from South Lebanon, from Gaza, with one exception, and that's the withdrawal from Egypt, the second time. Not the first time in 1956, but the second time, and only because there was a large buffer zone. Oh, okay, I'm
Okay,
finished, but
that's
could you
fine,
tell
yeah.
me how that would...
I'm not cutting you off.
Oh, okay. And that's because there was a large buffer zone that doesn't exist between Israel and the West Bank. There's a mountain ridge, and obviously there'll be rockets in there if Israel withdraws. So tell me how that could possibly enhance Israel's security.
Well, as I said, I think Israel lives in an earthquake zone, and the tectonic plates are shifting. I'm not advocating any specific outcome here. I said the parties have to negotiate the solution. The U.S. can help get them to the table, but if they don't want it more than we want it, it's not going to work. That's the way I started. My view is that in any shape or form, Israel will always be vulnerable if it doesn't make peace in the neighborhood. Whatever borders you pick, even if it's the mountain ridges, you understand that Israel is 11 minutes by missile from downtown Tehran. So there are many ways to try to penetrate Israel, and that is why the Iron Dome and its successors are so critical for Israel. But in the end, I think making peace with the neighborhood is in Israel's interest. There have to be secure borders. We or some UN force may have to play a role in policing those borders. That's, again, something that could happen. And yes, Israel's unilateral withdrawals have not helped, including from Gaza. You didn't mention Gaza. But a bilateral agreement on borders with the support of the entire region and the West, it seems to me, would be a better deal for Israel than the current situation.
Any other questions? Yeah, can you, well, you can either speak loudly, that's fine, that's fine. Okay, fine.
Hi.
In your review of the neighboring countries, you didn't mention Jordan. Mm-hmm. And it seems to me that in any discussions about the West Bank and Palestinian state, there needs to be an inclusion of Jordan in these discussions to make it viable. So how do you see that playing itself out?
Well, it's tricky. Jordan has been severely destabilized by 2 million refugees from Syria. Need to understand that. And it has a monarchy that is somewhat threatened by its population, which is largely Palestinian. I think that whatever deal is made, I think Jordan would want there to be secure border between Palestine and Jordan. That's one of the issues too. And Jordan will be a big player ultimately in how this comes out. Jordan heroically recognized Israel, as Egypt did some years back. King Hussein, the father of the current King Abdullah. And Abdullah is shaky, so you're right to mention it. And I guess my view is that a peace deal done right helps stabilize Jordan, and a deal to get Bashar out of Syria and put a transition government in there helps stabilize Jordan, and a deal to eliminate Iran's nuclear capability, other than civil nuclear capability, dramatically strengthens Jordan. So yes, it should be a beneficiary. It will be a beneficiary of at least the kinds of things I think should happen. There's one back there.
Yeah. Go ahead.
You were brilliant, as you always are. My question is...
I hired him to say this. This is Ambassador Bernstein, in case you missed it.
The Arab League, where are they? How come you don't see them doing anything, allowing the Arab world to just kill each other off?
Well, I actually think they're doing more than they used to do. They supported, I'm not sure how I think it came out, but they supported the effort in Libya. They have been, Kerry and others have met with them to try to get them more active on Syria, on the right side of Syria. My own personal view is the United States should have intervened much earlier in Syria. It would be a less hard problem if we had done that. But I think they would have to play in any final deal. I'm not sure, but I think they are supporters of the 2002 Saudi offer on Israel. I'm fairly sure that they are, or that they would be. And yes, you're right. A group of states in the region ought to be more forceful, and they have not been. I agree with you.
Over here.
No one questions the fact that having peace would be a great idea. The question is, not only is it possible to make peace, which is difficult in and of itself, but will the peace be able to be maintained? And to maintain peace, you need to have a reliable, not only reliable partners to make peace with, but also to be able to foresee that those reliable partners, which are not there now, will be able to withstand pressure from Iran, who's fanning anti-Israel sentiments everywhere, has their own interests, and many other powers. So right now, with what's going on with Hezbollah and Hamas and a very weak Palestinian Authority, all these efforts, if you're going to go to an Israeli public and tell them, and trust in this unstable partner, the future of your children from a distance of just a few dozen miles, I think that's a huge thing to request.
Well, that wouldn't be the request that I would want to make. I mean, my judgment of some of these parties is maybe a little different than yours. I think Hamas is pretty weak, especially after the fall of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. That's number one. I think that the government now, and Shibley may have some comments on this, in the Palestinian Authority, the Abbas government is not perfect, but he seems somehow reinvigorated and personally committed to doing his best. The reason I say that is, some of you may have seen him recently. I did see him recently at a private dinner in New York at the UN General Assembly. And I don't think we're going to have a better government than Abbas, or a better time to get, or a better time for a moderate Palestinian government than we have now. So that's my comment on that. You're right about Hezbollah. You're right that it is a terror group funded and armed by Iran. It's a bunch of bad guys who have destabilized the government in Lebanon and who were harbored in Syria, but not so much now because Syria is in turmoil. But again, as I see this, it's not in isolation. You think about Syria changing, Iran changing. I don't know that all this happens. Egypt becoming more stable. If that happens, Lebanon becomes more stable. There are more opportunities, as part of the Iran deal, to end its patronage of Hezbollah. Will all this happen? I don't know. But John Kerry describes diplomacy as a dance. And it's an interesting way to think about it. And a dance means the music keeps changing, the partners keep changing. Think about the fact that the people who could do these deals, not everybody, but most bodies, are in the room doing the different deals. So they're having a big opportunity to get to know each other better. And I think that the status quo is unsustainable for Israel. I said treading water when a tsunami wave is coming is a recipe for drowning. So that's how I think about it. I have the same commitment to Israel that you do, and I may not be right, but that's my best judgment about a way forward.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael Barenhouse from Bethesda, Maryland. I really enjoyed your presentation. I'm hopeful for peace between the two parties, but with the Palestinians and the Israelis. But how do we reconcile that one of the chief points of negotiations of the Palestinians is the ability to flood Israel with Palestinians? I mean, to live in the neighboring country. How do we reconcile that?
Well, that's actually, that cuts the other way for me. I mean, if you want to have Israel be, and I do, Israel's identity be a Jewish state, but a democratic state, you have to think about the fact that the youth bulge, the growth in Palestinian populations, will, if the current borders are maintained over time, make Israel, by human count, a majority Palestinian state. That's what's going to happen. The birth rate's higher. I know the Orthodox Jews have high birth rate too, but most people predict that over time, and I don't know exactly what the what day it will happen, that Israel will then be a minority Jewish population in a Palestinian state. And that's why people like Muammar Gaddafi, whom I met once, if you can imagine, had a proposal that Israel should be renamed Israeltine. This was his idea. He had a book in English, which he handed to me. I have fortunately lost it, which said Israel should be a democracy and everybody should vote and it'll all come out fine. If you don't want that outcome, then what you have to do, it seems to me, is agree, Israel has to agree on secure borders that define the Jewish state, that are smaller than the present borders. The Palestinian population, assuming you relocate people, much of it will live outside of Israel. There are Israeli Arabs now, but we're talking about the large Palestinian population on the West Bank, which is presently in Israel. But anyway, assuming the West Bank becomes part of a Palestinian state, that birth rate grows there. And yeah, there are going to be a lot of Palestinians surrounding Israel. But yeah, also there are going to be, hopefully, secure borders, a burgeoning, huge pro-growth economy. President Lowe was describing what kind of a place Israel is to his, we all who've been there many times know what an economic engine it is. And I think that outcome, assuming you get other things work in Syria and Iran and so forth, I mean, other bad things are stopped in those places. I think that's a good outcome that preserves Israel's identity as a democracy and a Jewish state. And that's what I'm for. Chaim Herzog in 1948 had this choice. He chose smaller land boundaries because he thought that would preserve the Jewish state. So I think you have to think about it. Sure, we have to worry about what are the boundaries and who protects them. But I think looking at the whole neighborhood, in the middle of an earthquake, this is the best way to go.
Benji.
Hi, my name is Benji Cannon. I'm a student here. Thank you so much for coming to speak to us, first of all. So Secretary Kerry actually, I think right before the negotiations started, said that he thought that there was kind of like a 2-year window left before the chances for a two-state solution died. I actually heard you also on a radio show, I think last year, with Stephen Walt, kind of talking about like the dicey Jewish future and kind of like the short term. So what's your view on that window for peace? Do you think it's a constructive way to talk about it? And also, do you think that putting a time limit on it is accurate at all?
Well, I think the best time to do the peace deal is right now. That's what I think. I don't know how many years are left. I don't know. Abbas is a guy who's threatened to retire many times. I'm not, as I said, I don't think his government is perfect. For my 2 cents, Salam Fayyad, who was there as his prime minister, was superb, and I'm very troubled that he's no longer there. But I think this is the best government Palestine will have. Shibli, I want you to say something. And I think the Israeli government, I think there are many in the Israeli government committed to doing this. And Tzipi Livni, who is the Minister of Justice, it's a coalition government, has great experience and great energy to do this. And there are others strongly committed. I don't want to characterize how each leader in Israel feels, but my impression is that a majority of Israelis still want a peace deal. We can argue again about what borders and exactly how it plays, but I do think the window is closing. I don't think we're going to have this conversation in 10 years if we don't get it done now.
Yes.
Well, you've spoken about Abbas a number of times, so you may as well now talk about Abbas and Hamas. So we need to bring Hamas into the conversation to actually talk about a Palestinian state. So I'd appreciate your view on all that.
Well, I actually agree. I think it would be helpful to have a unity government in Palestine. But the only way Hamas can join the government is if it renounces violence against Israel and agrees to the basic precepts that the quartet has put out there. And I think Hamas is very weak right now. I think the opportunity for this to happen is greater now than it has been in any recent time. And it's greater now because, as I mentioned, the Muslim Brotherhood is basically rounded up and certainly removed from power in Egypt. for the moment. So this is a good time, and Hamas is a brother of the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is a good time to act. How precisely will that happen? I don't know. That has to be a move of the Palestinian Authority, but I think in order to make a real peace, Hamas has to be, or should be, in the tent. Shibli, you want to say something about Palestine? Well, I mean, you think I'm doing pretty well? But, you know, you look at this really closely. Do you have any different assessment from mine? This is a really smart man, and he teaches at the University of Maryland, so what can be wrong with him? And he just wrote a book.
And it just said something good about you. How could that be bad?
Yeah, how can that be bad? Right.
Well, the reality of it is that the whole project of the American approach to working with the Palestinian Authority is not to ignore Hamas. I was an advisor to George Mitchell in the first administration when he was mediating Arab-Israeli peace. I happen to be one of the people who recommended actually working toward a national unity government, because I agree with the question, basically, that ultimately for final status agreement, you do need a unified Palestinian position. The approach of the administration, I think, is also Secretary Kerry's approach, is that in order, if you make a deal with the Palestinian Authority that is good enough for the Palestinian public to accept, then Hamas would have no choice but to join the game. That's really the approach. But the other side of the coin, of course, is that you're absolutely right, they're weakened. They have been weakened for sure, for a number of reasons, but especially because of the overthrow of Morsi in Egypt, undoubtedly. And they feel besieged. And of course, they lost their base in Syria. Don't underestimate that as well. They had a headquarters in Syria, and they pulled out of there, so they really are losing a lot of support. But nonetheless, they still have a lot of support in the Palestinian areas. And the Palestinian Authority is, if it doesn't deliver something very, very soon, something is going to give. And I think they're sitting, waiting in the wings. And the Israeli government, actually, just if you look at the Israeli press just in the past few days, is warning about the possibility of another intifada, because people are pessimistic about the outcome of the negotiations. Nothing seems to be happening. And undoubtedly, they're still sitting there. So yes, the timeline is really short. I think Kerry you're right about giving him the compliments for understanding that the time is running out. But time is running out. There's no doubt about that.
Let me just add one thing. Why not bring this back to our Congress? A lovely subject at this hour of night. One of the things our Congress has done right over the years is stand firmly on a bipartisan basis for protecting Israel's security. And that I don't think goes away, which is a really good thing. And Congress is standing firmly behind the sanctions on Iran, which, oh, by the way, I think had a lot to do with creating a new environment. Rouhani may be a more moderate person, He behaves more moderate. But some don't think he is. But anyway, the drastic economic environment in Iran caused by international sanctions, which Congress had a lot to do with, has helped to create an urgency in Iran, perhaps to cut a deal on the nuclear issue. And I don't see any reason why those sanctions should be waived by Congress. I do not see any reason. But I think if things proceed, then maybe Congress should, or the president should consider waiving the impact of some of those sanctions. I don't know how that goes. But I'm making the point that Congress is capable of doing things. Just maybe also Congress, if I weren't an optimist, I would not have served in Congress for 17 years, which is 119 dog years, by the way. Just maybe Congress will decide, now that the budget committees are supposed to meet and review and seek a compromise on the different budgets passed by the Senate and the House, just maybe they will stop bringing all the baggage into the room and saying, you did this to me 4 years ago and I resented it and all that. And just maybe they'll sit there and think, what kind of future are we going to have in this country if we can't ever agree on an annual budget? mean, it sounds like a dumb question. Most families can figure out how to do that. Even the Dubins in their bipartisan family, I think, can do this. But Congress can't seem to do this. Similarly, with this peace process, I don't think we're going to get a better time, certainly not with respect to the Palestinian Authority. And why can't the parties stop bringing the baggage into the room and look forward and think about what is an end state that we really want? I can't imagine it isn't peace. Look forward in terms of the lives of the kids in the region. I think there are Palestinian kids who have big dreams just like Israeli kids do. And there are so many others in the region who have been deprived. Lots of work to do to build a better future for these kids. And if that can be done, then some kid in the boonies of Yemen who's trying to decide whether to strap on a suicide vest or not will think, gee, maybe I have another option. And I don't think we have a choice. I think going in this direction is in the collective interest of the region, and it is in our national security interest. How we get there does matter. The parties have to want it more than we do. But I think it is a dream worth pursuing. And we've talked about it forever, but it is really time to get on with it.
Congresswoman Harman has unfortunately a scheduling conflict, so we have time for one more question, I think. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Josh Gilstein. I'm the president of the Jewish Student Union on campus.
I can take two questions, because then we're done. Okay.
And I understand the importance of the U.S. government's role in the cooperation of the different parties. And I'd like to take a step back and get your take on the role of the average American Jew, and what is our role in the conversation of peace talks and instability?
Well, I was talking about that. I think not just Jews, others who are, I mean, a lot of people have a stake in this. In fact, as it turns out, evangelical Christians are very interested in Israel, and so are many others. The average American citizen should care about this. I think an unstable Israel is something we should all care about, and an Israel invaded by her neighbors threatens our security interests, and that's something I dearly care about. So what can you do if you do care about this? You can write letters to your members of Congress. You can contact the Obama administration. You can do a lot of things. You can send a love letter to John Kerry, which is what I would highly recommend, a Valentine.
And yes.
Thank you for the last opportunity here. My name is Ira Hoffman, and I want to take us back to Iran for 1 second. I'm wondering if the positive signs, or those who want to paint them as positive, that we've seen recently, are driven more by something different other than what's been publicly discussed, specifically whether Stuxnet has done more damage and because the Iranians are caught in a tremendous bind, because if they disclose the extent of the damage, then arguably it's an act of war, and at the same time, but have they stood up to it? Have they done anything about it? And to save face in the Muslim world is a very important priority. On the other hand, for them to disclose how much damage was done would for them to reveal how close they are to weaponizing their nuclear program. So I'm wondering if there is far more damage that's been done by Stuxnet, and I accept the distinct possibility that you probably know more about it but can't confirm or deny.
Does everybody know what Stuxnet is? It's the offensive cyber program that was reported in David Sanger's excellent book and has led to some leak investigations. But anyway, it's an offensive cyber program that some government may or may not have been using to block advancement by Iran in its nuclear program. And the public reports say it was wildly successful. I really can't say very much. I hope it was wildly successful, whomever may have perpetrated it. Are the Iranians ever going to admit anything about it? Unlikely. Our intelligence on Iran, let me just close with this. I'm one who actually believed our intelligence on Iraq. I believed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. I read our intelligence on Iraq. I read the National Intelligence Estimate on Iraq. I traveled around the world. I was a senior Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee at the time, head of, I don't know if I was ranking member yet or head of the terrorism subcommittee, I can't remember. But anyway, I read this stuff, and I saw a serious threat to the United States, and I voted for our military action on Iraq. Then our intelligence turned out to be wrong. Sidney Harman, of course, said, you never should have believed that I knew it was wrong. He hadn't seen it, but that's okay. That never prevented Sidney from expressing his positions, as some of you will know. But that made me much more careful after that. And I have been much more careful. And I was a co-author of the Intelligence Reform Law of 2004, which passed Congress, which created the Director of National Intelligence and this chain of command function across our intelligence agencies, so we coordinate everything. I have continued to read a lot of our intelligence products because I serve on all these advisory committees and I have the clearances to do that. They're much better. Having said that, our intelligence on Iran ain't perfect. There's a lot we don't know. It's a very tough target. They are very sophisticated. And how advanced is their, you can read in the newspaper, I'm not going to tell you anything you can't read in the newspaper, but there's a different position between by us and the Israelis on how close they are to a nuclear weapon. It's not that different, but it's different. And we don't actually know absolutely how many stockpiles they have or all their capability, which again is why I think it is enormously critical to move fast on, give the maximum shot to the diplomatic effort on Iran. Because one of the things that does really fast is it gets inspectors back in there. It gets them to, if the terms that are being bandied about actually happen, they sign protocol to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, inspectors get back in the country, they agree to turn one of their most potent facilities into a research center, they limit their stockpiles, they limit their enrichment capacity, they move to something, I don't know that this happens, but this is what is being talked about, that could only fuel a civil nuclear capacity. We want this to happen. You bet we want this to happen. And I surely hope it will happen. If it can't happen, then we have to consider other options. I am for keeping all options on the table and keeping the sanctions in place. But I sure hope that there is a chance that diplomacy will succeed. Uh-oh. Now I'm in trouble. You need the mic? I didn't see you. I would have recognized you. Did you want to say something? Or you want me to recognize you? Joe, anyway, what an honor to have you here. Former Israeli ambassador to the United States and dear friend. So, folks, yeah. There he is. If I can just say a final thing, now that I'm late, running out the door, it's a hard problem. I don't pretend it is not a hard problem, but I think that there's no option to, doing nothing is not an option. Doing the right thing would be the best option.
Thank you very much. Our program is going to continue for about 5 more minutes after Congresswoman Harman leaves, but thank you again very, very much, and let's again show our appreciation. Thank you so much.